How's it going, everybody? I hope you're having a wonderful day. And I've been playing a lot of D4 recently with it, the early access release and all that. And I figured I'd try to get some build videos out, some guides out here, especially before the official launch. But one of the builds I want to highlight that I've been enjoying is an Ice Sorcerer build that focuses on vulnerability and freeze. And it is a pretty interesting build. It's a little bit different than some of the other guides out there that cover a similar build because I'm using different skills and doing things a little bit differently. Now do keep in mind, this is a beginner build. This is not necessarily going to get you through endgame, but it will get you to endgame. It'll get you far enough. It'll help you through the story. It'll help you if you don't really know what you want to do or what you want to think you want to do. But it is very new player friendly, very simple. It has a few things it wants to do. The main thing it wants to do is chill enemies, freeze them. That is the main thing, because, ice. And the next thing it wants to do is make them vulnerable. In case you don't know, vulnerable does increase the damage you deal to the enemy that is vulnerable. Very useful to have. And a lot of the skills are going to compound damage. We're going to stack damage. We're going to, when enemies are frozen, they're going to take more damage. They're going to, be chilled very quickly. We're going to have a lot of chill multipliers to get that chill built up. We're going to have ways to insta-freeze. We're going to have ways to just deal with all sorts of things. It's going to be very AoE heavy. We're going to have a lot of AoE damage, be able to clear out crowds quickly. The one thing where the build kind of struggles, but I think that's maybe a lot of builds, is single target. You're not going to have the greatest single target. Yeah, you'll be able to fight down elites pretty easy and stuff, but you're not going to be chunking them down super quick and taking out lots of hit points. You're more so going to be, dealing with big groups and AoE and everything down. And that is kind of the way the build is meant to be. So, without further ado, I think we should get into explaining the build and going over what skills I use, why I use them, how I use them, and getting into the details there. Now, to make this build work, there are a very few important skills you definitely got to make sure you have. But we're going to start from the top and work our way down. So we go with Frostbolt. Might be questionable to some people, but there are reasons for it. So the number one reason is we want to be chilling. We want to be applying chill as much as possible. Then, Frostbolts have a 15% chance to explode on chilled enemies, so when we do need to cast Frostbolt, we're going to do a little bit of an AoE damage attack because they're going to explode. And it's increased to 100% on frozen enemies. Then we have the Flickering, which makes them vulnerable. So basically, the idea is freeze them, Frostbolt them if you have to get vulnerable. That's just one of the ways to apply vulnerable. There are many ways to freeze, chill, and vulnerable in this build, and they all kind of synergize together and work in situations where you don't have to rely on just one skill. Our core skill, our main skill that we're going to be casting the most is Frozen Orb. Now, a lot of people do prefer Ice Shards, but I think Frozen Orb is better. Now, not only does Frozen Orb travel in a straight line in kind of an AoE and then explode into an AoE, so it has really good coverage, really wide coverage, and, we get bigger explosion when it's over 50 mana, and then the main benefit I find is vulnerability. So we can make Frozen Orb do a decent amount of vulnerability time and always makes frozen enemies vulnerable. So if they're not frozen, there's a chance, but if they are frozen, they're vulnerable. So right here, that's two skills that are inflicting vulnerable, which these are two you're going to be spamming the most. Coming down for our defensive options, we have Ice Armor. Ice Armor is nice. I think it's a really good barrier, especially with the defense it offers, but that's not the main reason we're using it. The main reason we are using Ice Armor is for the mana regen. You basically want to have Ice Armor up as much as you can to maintain an extra 25% mana regen, so you can just spam your Frost Orb, or your Frozen Orb. That's the main reason we have it, and that's the main reason we're using it. And if we get hit, we can instantly freeze enemies. So that just helps because we want everybody frozen so we can do the most damage and amplify. Now, another skill I have is Frost Nova. Now, this is interesting because I have two defensive options. But Frost Nova, what makes Frost Nova worth getting and why it's here is we can reduce the cooldown, which is whatever. It's this. Frost Nova makes enemies vulnerable for 4 seconds. Now, by making them vulnerable, I basically have a insta-freeze vulnerable option. So when Frost Nova's ready, things are getting hairy or I need to do some damage, I can instantly freeze and vulnerable enemies for 4 seconds, and it's up to 6 seconds against bosses. So Frost Nova is a very important skill and very essential, and it's just another skill that pretty much freezes and does vulnerable. Now we're going down. Blizzard. Blizzard is an interesting choice as well. The main reason we have Blizzard is for the AoE, the AoE damage it can deal. You can put it down in an area, kind of kite enemies around it. It does chill pretty well as well. And also, while Blizzard is active, we have our skills cost 10% less mana, which then is going to lead me into what I have for enchantments. And we do have Blizzard enchantment. Every 15 seconds, a blizzard forms over you and follows you for 6 seconds. So every 15 seconds, I'm going to cast a blizzard, and it's going to give me 10% reduced mana cost, and it's just going to add damage to everything. And that's kind of a free skill. I don't have to manually cast blizzard. I can just wait every 15 seconds and it goes off, and at that time, I have mana reduction costs. And also just nearby AoE, because a lot of my attacks, a lot of the plan is AoE damage. Now the other one we have is Frozen Orb as the other enchantment. And this one is whenever you cast a non-basic skill, you have a 20% chance to launch a Frozen Orb at a nearby enemy. This allows me to occasionally cast a second Frozen Orb when I cast Frozen Orb, or when I use any other skill that's not a basic attack, I get a free Frozen Orb that doesn't cost any mana. Sure, I can't really pick the target, but if there's only one target, it's going to go towards it, and if I'm fighting multiple enemies, it's going to pick something that I want to hit anyway. So those are my two enchantments, and they are a little bit, you know, maybe not what you would expect, but they definitely are what you want. Because, like I said, the more Frozen Orbs I get out, the more damage I can deal. Then we have Deep Freeze. Only got this one for it. I didn't get the third yet. You could easily get this, but I don't need it right now. But Deep Freeze is amazing. Basically, you're immune for 4 seconds, just constantly dealing damage to everything on screen. Then you explode, and everything blows up, and then when it ends, you got a barrier. So we definitely want barriers, because that's part of the build too. Now Shatter is the one I chose, because after freeze expires, enemies explode for 25% of the damage dealt to them. So the idea is freeze everything and constantly deal damage to it as it's frozen, to then deal an additional 25% damage. So as you can see, we're stacking damage on top of damage, which is kind of what you got to do in this game. And we're also using vulnerable and freeze to achieve that. And chill, of course. Now these are very important, these passives here. Permafrost, Hoarfrost, and Icy Touch. Damage against elites is increased, 9% increased damage against chilled, 18% increased damage against frozen, 12% increased damage against vulnerable. So anything that's chilled, frozen, or vulnerable is getting damage multipliers stacked on it like crazy. So huge increase in damage there. Icy Veil, your barriers have a up to 15% increased duration. When you have a barrier active, you apply more chill. These are also ones you want to cap out, because you're going to be having a barrier on pretty frequently. Almost constantly, you're going to have a barrier up at some point. So very important. And Snap Freeze is even one you want to get eventually too. We also have Align the Elements for reduced damage against elites. We have Protection, using a cooldown grants 10% of your maximum life as a barrier for 2 seconds. So whenever we cast Frost Nova or Deep Freeze, or even Ice Armor, I guess we're getting a second barrier. We're getting a barrier on ourselves. And this is only level 1, so it goes up even higher. And then Mana Shield, every time you spend 100 mana, you gain damage reduction for 5 seconds. Just survivability there. And those are pretty much the key passives we're going to want. You know, the main passives of the build. And that's pretty much the setup. So hopefully, you know, you guys kind of got an idea of the general idea of this build. And it is very beginner friendly. It's, you know, probably not going to go too far in endgame. I don't know. I'd have to try it a little bit more. But it'll definitely clear you through the story, get you through the campaign. It has a lot of synergies with freezing and vulnerable and chilling. And by stacking all that together, we're just getting maximum damage, maximum crowd control. And that's kind of the general idea of the build. Let me know if you guys have any questions about the build or any comments. And as always, thank you so much for watching. And I hope to see you in the next one. Until then, later guys. Peace out. Have a good one.